Okay, so it's June, the solstice is tomorrow. We're here at Mother Oak Permaculture. We're going to do a short version of a tour here. So we'll get started. It just rained a lot last night, so the grass is long and wet and drooping. And we're going to walk through, and I'm going to point out some of the species diversity, some of what's going on here. The permaculture rollout was about 9 years ago, and I've lived here for 27 years, but really the permaculture didn't really start seriously until about 10 years ago. But we were already doing things like supplying our own firewood, which you can see that, and planting willow trees. We were doing that beforehand. Anyway, we'll go this way. We have 3 ponds. This is pond 1. This is part of a water catchment of Cascading Ponds. This pond is quite high up, so we can utilize the water. We're going to focus on the outside right now rather than the building. So one of my goals has been to replace plants that I don't want, like couch grass, and with plants that I do want, like comfrey and fruit-bearing bushes and perennial flowers we've started putting in. Although we do get a yield from the couch grass because we scythe it and give it to the goats. So we're on a zone 1 pathway here. It gets used many times a day. We've planted raspberries along it. We get yields out of almost everything around here. Queen Anne's lace, the goats love it. Makes beautiful flowers that attract beneficial pollinators. This is a berry, I forget which one it is. I think it's a salmon berry that's been here. This is its 2nd or 3rd year. It's adapting to our difficult, heavy clay soils. There's a perennial flower there that's coming. We've got other perennial flowers that we plant. There's a poppy here getting ready to open that we planted a couple years ago. And then these purple flowers that you see are wild phlox that spreads by itself, and it's quite invasive and shades out some of the weeds we don't want. So it's good for bumblebees and butterflies especially. The honeybees don't seem to take to it, but it's brought in a lot of butterflies. So we're just going to pass by the nursery here, have a quick glimpse. Things are messy because it's spring and we don't have time to organize a lot, but here's some of our transplants for the market garden here. They're getting ready to go out. So we're going to go down towards the orchard now. Some people might call it a food forest. I just call it an orchard. It's a polyculture. It's got different plants. It's pretty simple, really. But there's a lot going on. So we have a lot of diversity. We have reed canary grass, which the goats like. We have a volunteer maple here, which the goats eat. So feeding the goats is part of the regime of part of the yield that we're constantly getting here. There's a juniper that won't seem to make juniper berries. We've got a rhubarb planting here. If you look this way, one of the things to notice here is how well utilized the edges are. This is an edge that wasn't doing anything, and now it's growing hazelnuts and some flowers. Almost every tree that we have is a productive tree. We've got pear trees over there. We've got a cherry that we just put a frame up. We're going to net that. There's a lot of comfrey growing, you'll see, and L-campaign, dynamic accumulators. You can think of them as a fountain, drawing minerals out of the ground and bringing them up to the surface. both goat food as well, and soil builders. A lot of biomass happening underneath, which is basically enriching the soil. We've got a kiwi there, a northern kiwi that got kind of fried by the frost. And the grapes got kind of fried by the frost. This is some kind of berry bush, which I forgot what kind of berry it is. We have perennial flowers. These are actually a nice peony's worth $2 a stem in the city. All right, we're on our way to the garden here, and we're passing in zone 1 our peach trees, which you can see the peaches are turning and plumping up in a week or so, and we'll be able to eat them. Things are exploding because of the heat and the moisture and the frost that we had in June, which I think stimulated everything to grow even more vigorously than it normally does. Those peaches were thinned repeatedly, and we never seem to be able to thin them enough. Okay, these are just perennial wildflowers we like to have around. Here's a shot of the sea berries. It's mid-August, so things are in full bloom, and you can, behind that there's a nectarine tree that's drooping with nectarines, the biggest yield we've ever had. That tree got over a pretty serious case of leaf curl, and the only thing I did is I sprayed some Plocher on it. You could look it up, Plocher. It's like a homeopathic German concocted dolomite-based spray for the health of plants. I think very interesting. That's all I did, and we've got a lot of health. You can see the sea berries, you can see the walnut trees, you can see the electric fence that's down because I had my cows pastured right in here in the pathways. You can see the grapes exploding. You can see our bindweed, one of our more serious weeds that we're going to lose the war, but we try to win as many battles as we can. This is our watering station where we gravity feed into this, and then we water by hand, which we really haven't had to do much this year, but it's very helpful to water in direct seeded stuff. That's our sweet corn, which we don't sell. A very tiny parsley planting, which we do sell. A new cilantro planting. This is where the garlic was, which we do sell. Kale we sell. We're having quite a good onion crop this year. Mulched, we barely had to weed those onions at all. This is some amaranth, it's an annual. We were going to sell some flowers anyway. There it is. I was scything Comfrey this morning, so you'll see some slash and drop happening here. This is a bed that grew squash. This is a succession. We just planted scallions in there yesterday. This is all hand cultivated. The tractor I drag an S-tine through here in the spring to loosen the soil, and then we hand cultivate. There's no plowing, disking, or anything. We just loosen and break it up when the moisture level's right. Add some amendments usually if we think we need it. Blood meal, some bone meal, things like that, compost, and then we dig it in. So we left off showing the comfrey that we integrate into the garden that's growing on the south sides of these beds. Okay, so you can get a close-up here. This comfrey is on its, I think this is the second, or I think it's the third growth. I think I've done this twice. So I come through here, I scythe it, and then we take it and we mulch with it. So there's a shot of what happens with the comfrey. So this is basically soil building. As I started mentioning in the earlier, the comfrey acts mechanically as a weed barrier. It smothers and shades weeds that would otherwise grow on the south embankment of these raised beds, which have swales in them. Because here we get, there's a danger of getting too much water. Is usually a little more dangerous than not having enough water here. So I want a swale that can run a little bit. So we're a little off contour there. Anyway, back to the comfrey. So dynamic accumulators, as I mentioned, act like fountains, and to bring minerals up. Minerals wash off these beds in rains and are largely captured by the comfrey, and as well as all the nitrogen that's in the leaves and the NPK that's in the leaves. So all of that's coming back up. And I don't take for granted that I'm always going to be able to get enough old hay or straw locally to mulch like I did. So I wanted to be prepared. This is part of our design for disaster, that if I need mulch, I have it. It's growing right exactly in the garden where we want it. So here you see we've got 2 onion beds that really didn't get virtually any weeding, and the onions are now starting to die back. They're pretty much ready to harvest. I'm going to pull one. So there's an organic onion. That's a valuable product right there. And we'll have all of our onions for the entire year, and probably a couple hundred pounds to sell. And tomorrow's Friday, so I'll gather that up tomorrow. This is a beet planting. We have another coriander planting that is a succession to some carrots that grew here. You can see the comfrey's growing back from its 3rd cut. Already it responds very vigorously to being cut. You can see what happens here on the south embankment. So when the comfrey grows, it will shade that embankment. Otherwise it'll, grow crabgrass and things like that. So we do have weeds, and we do spend a lot of time on weeds. Hoeing them and trying to prevent them, and then once they get ahead of us, then hand pulling them. So prevention is mostly done with hoeing and mostly with mulch. So here's another example of the comfrey at work and between the leeks. So this was done here. It was done with those few brassicas over there. These all have comfrey mulches. This is only the 3rd year of this comfrey. It started out as an experiment in the upper beds, and I kind of liked it right away. So we had enough people power here, and every single one of these comfrey plants was planted by hand. This is a sterile comfrey that does not propagate by itself. It doesn't spread. Although all you have to do is break up a root and drop it in the wrong place or shove it over, and it will start growing in other places. Otherwise it does stay put. So this is a pretty small garden. It'd be very easy to toss a rock across it. My definition of human scale is whether you can toss a rock across your garden or not. Lengthwise would be a little more difficult. This garden is also surrounded by grass on which we pasture the cows. Another thing we do is we collect cardboard in town. You can see it at work here. There's cardboard underneath this old hay. There it is. It will, one good layer of cardboard will prevent weeds through the whole season. And this year I've actually started with some cardboard that doesn't have old hay on it, and there's a risk that it will blow away, but if it rains on it first, then it probably won't blow away. So we made the mistake years ago of not recognizing how awful this particular weed is. This is crabgrass, digitaria or something, and it is very difficult grass to get rid of. You can hoe it, and if there's moisture and there's one single root hair touching the ground, just touching it, it will go through that root hair and start growing again. So anyone who tells you that you don't have to weed, as I've said before, is either uninformed or has no experience or is lying. I've seen people's gardens where the weeds are doing much better than the vegetables, if you can find the vegetables in their gardens. And the one thing I can guarantee you is that those people are not supplying most of their food, much less a surplus. So what you see here is we just need a fraction of those leeks for ourselves to ferment and store over the winter, which we do. They store until May, no problem, but there's a surplus there. And you're just not going to have a leek crop like that if you don't weed it. At least not around, not in the universe that I'm familiar with. So we can walk up, take some shots here as we go. We're approaching a windbreak, which I built last fall on the right there, which is breaking the wind for the garden above it. This is a windbreak that I planted about, it's probably been 10 years ago, that's breaking the worst winds that hit this greenhouse. Can you come this way? So we've got this Ella campaign, which unlike Comfrey does spread by seed, and I've been on a campaign to not let it go to seed, but these are obviously going to go to seed. They're pollinators. You can see the honeybees on them. They're dynamic accumulators, but like nettles, they spread, and I'm not certain that more is better. The goats do like to eat them, but there's a point where you're overwhelmed by numbers. So we're dancing around that point, so I'm just going to double down on trying to keep it from going to seed, which we have. We've used it in another garden, which you haven't seen. Before it set seed, we used trailer loads of it as mulch, and it's working beautifully in the pathways. We cut the whole stalk. We have got a tremendous amount of it. Anyway, we'll just take a quick walk through the greenhouse. This you can just step over, step over that. Oops. There we go. Keep the camera over here, please. All right, so we've got some squash in here. We got squash bugs, which I actually have been dealing with lately, and I do that with a propane torch. If you do it in the morning when there's a little moisture on the plants, I could come here and just wave that torch over those squash bugs, which will kill this plant, or could kill this plant, depending on the response of the plant, and I don't want that to happen, so I can reduce their population very rapidly with a handheld propane torch. So this is our, let's just move up here. I don't usually plant broccoli in the greenhouse, but this was a response to our early cold weather that I couldn't really plant the broccoli outside. And this particular variety of broccoli has responded very well, and it just keeps making more and more florets, so it paid for itself right away. This is our cherry tomato crop, which along with garlic is one of our main cash crops. We've got some beans in there. I don't usually grow beans in the greenhouse, but again, this greenhouse has been operating for 24 years. The weeds had gotten a bit out of control, so we used black plastic and just left it fallow for a month or two, and it just cooked the weeds under there. So then I put some beans in because the timing was right. Here's our cucumber crop. We are not, we are not what I would call, professional growers. But even though this is my sole source of income, and we just don't have enough people, we don't have enough hands to take care of everything here. So if you see things that are not looking as good as they could, that's my excuse, is we just don't have enough people to do it, and I don't even want to think about increasing my volume so that I can pay more people to do it. So this works. The fact of the matter is that we have we show up at the market and we're the only ones with tomatoes and organic tomatoes, and so there's been no problem for me to pay off this farm and have a livelihood for the last 25 years. Okay, so so you can see there's a lot of diversity, and there's an integration of market crops with perennial crops. There's some raspberries there. There's a beautiful Bosc pear tree there. These are caged Roma tomatoes here, which there's a very hungry market for. This is our caged cherry, which we just caged this spring, and it worked. We finally got some cherries. We've got an Asian pear there. We've got a tremendous amount of Elecampane coming up, integrated with Comfrey, and if we can keep up scything it, it's actually going to replace a lot of these grasses and shade them out, and we'll see. Right now it's a dance with the Elecampane. There's our little chard planting, so you can see that this is a small scale operation. And that's exactly how I want it. Here's Comfrey. This is also third growth Comfrey that's growing, that's acting as a border. You can see how it's mechanically kind of keeping the tomatoes somewhat contained. Because of the extremely hot, wet weather, the tomatoes are exploding more than they normally would. The fact that it's small makes it manageable, and if I have losses, I don't have huge losses. So that's all in preparation for not just climate disaster, but economic disaster, which, if you're paying attention, is definitely coming. Thank you to our central banks for that, and people's laziness and greed. So anyway, you can see asparagus growing in this would qualify as our food forest. We don't get great yields off the asparagus, but we do get some asparagus. This is a new apple tree which looks a little distressed. I probably won't do anything about that. Maybe spray some polyculture on it or something. I don't know. Probably nothing. Anyway, you can see the diversity in there. There's a lot of different kinds of apples. There's two big spy trees, which are usually biennial bears, and they're having a good year right now. The productivity on the edges. This edge here was unused for quite a few years. Mostly I had to mow it, mow the weeds down, and so now it's going to have hazels, which are short enough that they're not going to shade the nursery, and they're also far enough away from the woods to discourage squirrels from coming here, because they have to navigate the dog and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, you're looking at probably 2 acres for the permaculture proper landscape here. Here's something we do usually 3 times a day. I save myself thousands of dollars by constructing this myself, which by this I mean the post and the frame, and we can manually turn these panels, which gets you 30% more sunlight than if they're fixed on the roof like those, which means a 30% more yield on the money that you spent on those panels. 30% more yield on the resources that went into those panels. So pretty simple. Probably cost me less than just a few $100s to construct that. So we're very do-it-yourself around here, and repurposing is a really big theme, and you can see it everywhere here. Don't forget to watch our other videos. It's called the common room, which even though it's attached to the greenhouse, it's actually a very shady room. And we do classes in here. We have a propane gas stove somebody gave me, which we cook on because it's very quick and easy. And